last night's town hall, Donald Trump was asked about the media. I bet he liked that question. Now, I'm not sure, but I think he liked that question.
I think I like that question. I'm not sure, but I think I like that question. I appreciate it. I appreciate the prayers, too, very much. Look, I am greeted with a hostile press, the likes of which no president has ever seen. The closest would be that gentleman right up there. They always said Lincoln, nobody got treated worse than Lincoln. I believe I am treated worse. And I feel that if I was kind to them, I'd be walked off the stage. I mean, they come at you with the most horrible, horrendous, biased questions. And you see it, 94 or 95% of the press is hostile.
I know. Lincoln's run didn't end well. But Trump was referring to assaults by the media, not by disgruntled actors, although they're easily confused. The danger with asking Trump about the press is that it creates that never-ending media spiral. The media attacks Trump, Trump fights back, the media responds angrily since fighting back is breaking the rules. So Trump rips them again, which they cover again like it's D-Day. Meanwhile, we all remember who helped elect Trump, the media. And some of today's loudest Trump haters fawned all over him during election season. But I'd rather have a president who's generous with insults, but stingy with blood and treasure. Does the selfish media agree? In The Hollywood Reporter, the press laments how exhausted they are covering Trump. It's the hectic pace, they say. So would they have preferred someone slow and sleepy who just bombs crap? Then they also complained about having to cover impeachment, which was their own obsession that let a virus sneak up on us. Extend that cluelessness over decades, and you wonder how much stuff they really missed. So now they pine for normalcy, when they could slow down and take selfies again, which leaves them with Joe. He's perfect. Old, slow, loves a good nap. You won't break a sweat covering him. Plus, he just promised today that as president, there'll be no bullying of the media. What a telling deal now, given that he's being dogged by a sex scandal. So media, what do you think? Joe just said if you elect him, it all goes back to sleep. A return to magnificent hibernation. Joe will be the lapdog that won't bite. He'll just sniff. Jesse, let's face it, if you're going to interview Donald Trump in front of a giant Abe Lincoln, you think he's not going to compare and contrast? I mean, that's kind of a setup, don't you think?
Yes, Abe will come up in that conversation, you can guarantee.
Yes.
Can you imagine, Greg, the media, how they'd sound if Barack Obama were president during the pandemic? It goes something like this. Barack Obama, putting politics aside and sacrificing the key to a successful re-election, shut down the economy just in order to save lives. His bold, early, and scientific-based action shut down flights from China while his political opponents impeached them. Then he rallied both parties together to pass enormous relief for the American people and, at a very good moment, rallied the world around China while his main political opponent stayed in the basement around a dark cloud of very credible sexual assault allegations. That's what it would sound like. Now, I know the president's not going to get great coverage like that, but the president just wants fair coverage because he never got credit for winning the election. They said Russia cheated. He never got credit for the economy. They said it was Barack Obama's. And he's not getting credit for anything, for ventilators, for flattening the curve, for the travel ban. And you know when they find a vaccine or they do anything positive, they're not going to give him any credit. And this is what he wants, to be treated fairly. Because right now, they're blaming him for everything and praising China. How insane is that? I'm old enough to remember when Barack Obama compared himself not only to Lincoln, but to FDR, Reagan, and JFK. The media didn't say squat. They nodded in agreement. But Donald Trump compares himself to Lincoln, and they act like he doesn't even know that he was shot. That's how bad it is. And here's the last point about how biased they are. When they even talk about the comparison between Lincoln and Trump, the media can't even report that Lincoln was a Republican. They hate to admit that, so they just don't admit it.
I only compare myself to a William Henry Harrison because no one ever does. One, You got to admit, it's kind of weird that today Biden says, hey, if you elect me, I will play nice. I'm not going to bully you. Because, I mean, he's basically saying, you know, this sex scandal stuff, you know, just hold. I'm mind reading here. I could be wrong. But don't you find the timing a bit odd?
No. In fact, you know, yesterday, that question that you cited, Greg, came from someone who seems to be a Trump fan.
Right.
And what she said in the question was basically, Mr. President, why are you always boasting? Why are you always bullying? Why are you always bad-mouthing people? Maybe you should try a different tack. That's where the question came from.
True.
And I just think, you know, even if the president wants to compare himself to Lincoln, I mean, obviously by his demise, there's a little different outcome in terms of bad treatment. But historically, if you think about the founding of the country, Jefferson going after Adams when there was only a partisan press and, you know, they would plant stories about each other, that was pretty nasty. Richard Nixon got out and he said, you won't have me to kick around anymore. Talk to Lyndon Johnson about bad press in Vietnam. So to me, I just don't get that. I want to make two other quick points, Greg. The first one is on the timeline. You know, it seems to me that when President Trump talks about how, you know, he acted quickly, I don't think anybody thinks he acted quickly, but then he says Nancy Pelosi was dancing around as if Nancy Pelosi gets the presidential daily briefing. And according to all the reports, this thing was warning him and him alone as the president about the damage that could be done by the coronavirus. And he was the one that was slow to act, not Nancy Pelosi, who didn't have that information. So, I mean, I think, you know, he draws these comparisons, and it just seems to me like he's making excuses way up front and unnecessarily. One other thing I'd say, what's the business about, oh, yeah, you know, I think there may be more deaths coming, and why not hydrochloroquine? Yeah, we could try that still. I'm amazed that he is still talking about that drug, which, as the VA's own study has said, doesn't have any effectiveness in terms of battling the COVID-19 virus.
Well, you went off on a lot of tangents there. Number one, everybody can point fingers. I thought we already went through this, but it's about correcting your mistakes. Trump actually acted quickly after presenting an optimistic perspective, and he often changes his perspective when he gets medical information. So everything he did was based on medical information. The hydroxy study has already come under a heavy scrutiny because it was done with seriously ill people who were already at death's door, and they were comparing them to people who were less ill. And by the way, if you talk to doctors, they're still pretty strong on this stuff. I find it weird, Dagan, that when the press complains about Trump, it's almost always psychological, not physical. They're not saying, oh, my God, he's invading countries and cutting programs for the poor, because he's not. So the complaint is psychological, that they can't endure it because, you know, he's just too much for us to handle.
Because they're lazy, because they want to avoid any kind of real research reporting, and this is many of them, not all of them, or any real analytical thinking. Think about how easy their job has been over the last 4 years. So whatever the president says, whatever the president does in terms of policy, you just say, it's an attack on fill in the blank. You huff, you sneer, you roll your eyes, and then you pull like a nasty adjective or noun out of your armpit to insult him. Meanwhile, what is the American people, what have they learned from all of this reporting? They have been the crapqueduct for the Democratic Party, shill in the Russia hoax collusion narrative, and that's what we've gotten. Is the equivalent in terms of journalism of, I can't even say it on TV, but in terms of what they serve up, it's cream chip beef on toast.
One of my favorite breakfast treats.
I love that.
You know, Dana, I want to go back to what Joe said about the promise that he wouldn't bully the media. Is that kind of, I mean, that struck me as sad. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it struck you as sad, didn't it?
Well, I just remember, like, Hillary Clinton. If you ask Hillary Clinton about the New York Times, like, she might actually hate the New York Times more than Donald Trump does.
Right.
She truly believes that paper was one of the ones. Remember, they broke the story about the Clinton Global Initiative. They relentlessly went after the email story. And so I just think wherever you sit when you're in the middle of it, you think it's the worst thing that anything has ever happened. But history has a long arc. And if I were reporters, I would continue to get out of Washington, D.C. and cover the stories out in the country. Because if you want to tell stories about what's happening and to try to affect change in Washington, that's the best way to do it.
Such a good piece of advice, Dana. Always with the good advice.